Come on. It's all good. It's all good. So here we have Beyond Ray podcast. This is like a great opportunity for us to just welcome our amazing speakers, Margaret, Kate, Ginger, and Jillian.
Hi, everyone.
Well, hello, everyone. Everyone that's here live, thank you. Hello, virtual audience, thank you so much. Seems like maybe my coworkers are watching, so I'll try not to embarrass them. Yeah, so I'll bring us in here. We are Beyond Ray, women-led conversations on industrial design. Maybe you've heard of our podcast. It's Margaret from Meta. We have Kate from the AXBAT division of Baden, and I'm Ginger from Fluke Corporation. A little bit on why we started this project. I think we've been workshopping it. We wanted to tell the stories that aren't as heard and reveal all these different paths that you can take. You should feel entitled to take as a designer and a person, because there's not one way to do things. And we hope that in this live kind of experimental version of our show that you're invited to this space we've created and that you can make some meaningful connections with each other. And we wanted to highlight the wonderful design scene in Chicago here with our guest.
Yeah, and maybe before I keep on introducing Jillian, we should give you some snapshot of people we've talked to before. We always make an episode with a guest, and we've talked with quite a few people already from all different types of designers. Today we wanted to show you what this podcast is and how much information you can get about someone when you not focus only on their LinkedIn, only on their career, but get to know a little bit of the personal life, the hobbies, the motivations, some deeper stories. And to celebrate the Chicago scene, we brought in Jillian from Minimal. Jillian is now a design director, but she spent almost 9 years in Minimal, which is pretty well-recognized agency. Congrats on landing this job straight out of college. We will ask about it later. And you will tell us more about how was the life for you in design and not only, and how do you cultivate this creativity, and what kind of a person you are despite being such an amazing designer.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so with that in mind, I think we'll just start kind of vaguely in the beginning of your journey here in Chicago. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into design and how you advanced and eventually got to Minimal?
So like many people do, I started thinking that I wanted to be a graphic designer. I did know industrial design existed, but I didn't really know what it was. So I went to school. We had to take a bunch of different classes our first year, and then you apply for the program. So I took an industrial design class, and I loved the 3D nature of it, and the way that it took things from being on a screen, or maybe you don't have to design with as much of a user experience in mind when you're doing the type of graphic design we were doing, at least in the first year. Obviously, that's not the case for many types of graphic design, but that's kind of what drew me to industrial design initially.
Yeah, and I'll just put a shout out here. You have really fantastic mixed media 2D art as well. So clearly that's followed you into your professional life or hobbies and stuff that you cultivate. Do you feel like you took a lot of those from school into today?
I think so. I also make art on the side. I think it's a nice creative break from design where you're so constrained to creating physical objects with constraints and human factors to think about. So it's nice to kind of get out of that mindset a little bit and just create art, get back to where I started, before college. So that's kind of where that comes from.
Was that a big shift in mindset when you left school and you were a professional that you could take this on? Were there other changes that you were sort of confronted with transitioning from student to professional?
I think it was a little bit of a relief to transition from being a student to a professional. When I was in college, I almost failed my thesis because I took on too much work.
I'm not buying to that story.
She was trying to do two of them, is what I learned in the last session.
I was trying to do 2 theses, and the one slipped by the wayside. Anyway, it worked out. I did graduate. So it was kind of nice to get into a role that was more predictable. And have some time to cultivate hobbies and things outside of the work to keep myself creative.
Yeah, maybe you can tell the audience something you told us, because designers, there are 2 camps. There are people who say, design is my job, but also my hobby, and I design 24/7. Lindsay, Linda, full then. Sure. But you said like something that was really for me, that design is not your whole life, because I always feel so guilty about myself that I do other stuff after work. And like sports are hobby, maybe not design. Someone asks about personal projects and I'm like, I do children's book illustration. I don't do render weekly. And I feel like so bad. I was so happy talking to you and you were like, oh yeah, I do art.
Yeah, I do love my job and I love design, but I can't do it 24/7. Like I love to experience new things and try new hobbies and try new activities. And I think, yeah, exactly what you're saying. I'm not someone who's going to submit to Render Weekly. It's really cool when people do that, though. I love what people create, but it's not my thing. And that's okay. I think for a lot of people, it's good enough to love your job and then have like a life outside of it that's a little bit different.
Was there like a way that you knew, like, no, I'm not going to do Render Weekly? Because like it's very alluring. I would say I've been tempted to try it too, but then like there's so many other things to do in life. Did you try anything out and then say, nope, not going to do design in my spare time?
I think that was just once I got out of school, and in school you're really so focused on learning new skills, and it's kind of design 24/7. I just was looking for a little bit of a change and to direct my design focus towards my job.
That said, in your spare time, it does sound like you're super involved in the Chicago scene. You've remained involved in like school, like your alma mater. Can you talk a little bit about like why you decide to keep in touch and like volunteer at events and stuff?
Yeah, I really enjoyed going to UIC, so I go back there every now and then. Like most recently, I went to help judge the UIC Merit Awards. So that was fun, seeing what the students are up to these days.
Talking about like how is working in consultancy right now, you told us before a lot about how were you growing your skills as a student. You were addicted to student competitions, quite successful, and also to thesis project. What methods of advancing your career did you take on when you started working professionally? Like, did you switch from the student mentality just like that to now I'm like 9-to-5 designer? No, you actually put a lot of work, right? And took you some time to figure out what's the best way to grow yourself as a designer.
Yeah, I think for sure there's a difference between being a student and learning how to integrate into like a professional space. It's hard to say what exactly the specific like things I tried were, but it helped being part of a pretty small team where other people would kind of help guide where I should go with different concepts or what I should think about when I'm designing a real product instead of just a student project.
Do you have any fun story from making one of your first products that maybe something worked well and maybe something was like a disaster?
I mean, I can't really think of one of the first products, but I can think of a time when we kind of collectively failed as a team. It wasn't a complete failure, but it is something that sticks with me. But yeah, we were designing like a beverage maker, and we had taken like a really like technical approach to this project in particular. So, we were thinking about like the stack up and the way someone might interact with the object. And those are all good things to think about. But when we presented the concepts to the client through that lens, they were kind of confused. Like they were looking for something more inspirational. So we took a step back and kind of like looked at everything through a more poetic lens, like trying to find inspiration in other things around us that are not so rooted in design. And that was a nice reminder that design isn't always just like human factors and stack ups. Sometimes it's about creating a story around an object.
Why did you think that would work for this client in particular? What was the way in for that?
I think it was partially their audience and the way that they saw design as a company. Like we knew that the client was going to be taking this work and presenting it to like a marketing team or something. So they really wanted something that would connect with people on a level that was not quite as technical and get people to like buy into the story of the design.
Do you think there's a lot of trial and error when finding what the client wants in terms of which facet of design, or are they kind of some of them upfront with what they want?
Yeah, it's hard. I think it changes from client to client. sometimes it's made very clear what a client wants. Other times you have to do a little bit of learning and understanding.
Is it like a lot of talking? Do you present a lot of things to them? Are there different processes that work for different clients?
Yeah, definitely. I think it also depends on what we're designing. Like a furniture project is way different than like a consumer electronic or a medical device. And the processes that go along with those are a lot different as well.
Yeah, a lot of different projects you worked on. Is it like just given that consultancy always get different projects, or were you just lucky at Minimal? Do you get to choose what you want to focus on?
Kind of. I mean, I think if someone is very passionate about a certain type of product, we'll try and throw them onto that. Or, I also made it known that I wanted to work on furniture at some point, and so I got the opportunity to work on those types of projects. But it's not always that way. Personally, I like the variety and like trying new things. So I'm always looking for like, oh, what's the next thing that I haven't tried before? Treating it like a learning experience a little bit.
What is the next thing you haven't tried yet?
I don't know. I guess I'll know
When you see it?
when I see it. I'll know it when I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, something that Angela mentioned during first presentation. When you hire a consultancy to do design specifically, design is very valued. That's the position you are in. Do you have like any advice for like internal design teams, how to sell the design better within the company and how like make people respect you more and trust you? You must have like some of this presentable consultancy design personality.
Yeah, that is a tricky thing to do. I think we're always looking for new ways to present, especially to people who don't understand design. Like with consultancy work, sometimes you're working as the extension of like an internal design team, but other times you're like selling design to people who don't understand design very well. So you have to kind of like, I think it kind of does tie into the story about making things or giving a story to the designs. Sometimes that is a strategy that can work. Otherwise, no one's going to argue with a really good human factor story. So, as everyone knows,
These are the go-tos.
And conversely, when you're working with a really robust internal design team, how do you show up and get buy-in from them that they should really join you in the design process you're going to lead, instead of there being like potentially any tension, internal, external?
I think that one's more about collaboration, because we're not trying to, anytime we join an internal design team, we're not necessarily trying to say, you shouldn't do that, you should do this instead. It's more like, what have you tried? What can we learn from you? And how can you help influence us to design what's right for your team, or to help design on like with your team?
Do you think this variety of experience with different in-house teams actually helps you help the next in-house team? Like you have taking in so much design process knowledge. Do you like kind of spread it around, spread the love?
Maybe. I mean, we don't work on that many projects per year, so I don't know that there's that direct of a translation of like working with one in-house team, and then also, but it is nice to learn from the in-house design teams, or even learn from people who don't know anything about design but know about other fields that might be slightly related.
Yeah, we have like a lot of students here, I believe, from the introduction when we learned about the percentage of people who are in which stage of their career. Should we maybe chat who is consultancy for and who is in-house for? Like, do you need like any skills that really pays off in consultancy? Because I am the strong believer that people are either in-house style or outhouse style. I'm probably wrong, but like, I know I'm an in-house person. I was in consultancy and I was crying. Maybe it was the wrong workplace, but like, I just love moving USB-C port back and forth for 6 months and then seeing in a Best Buy in probably wrong location, not where I moved it eventually. But like, what's the skill set for consulting? And yeah, how do you decide to start with consultancy when you're a student? Usually it's like the first internship I get and you'll take anything just to have first rent paid. But if someone had comfort to choose between one and another, who would you see in consulting?
I liked the idea of starting out in consulting because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. As a student, I remember being asked, "Oh, so what do you want to do?" And my answer was always, "I'm not sure. I'd like to try a bunch of stuff." So consulting was nice to go in and get experience from a variety of different clients. And then as far as like skill set goes, I think, well, for us, like we do a lot of 3D concepting and modeling and prototyping, which isn't necessarily different from in-house, I don't think. But what do you
company
guys
to
think?
company, I would say. Yeah, plenty of 3D modeling happening in-house too.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, being able to create like a visual story with your design is probably come up with concepts pretty quickly and pretty divergently. You know, if you're hopping from one type of project to another in the same day, it's maybe mostly about like that divergent thinking. How would you say in-house is, or comparatively?
I think it depends, but like probably less storytelling and more coding.
Yeah, I mean, presumably you have buy-in from your company already that you should be doing that job. I do
Yeah.
think sometimes you have to convince the engineers or the business side, but maybe you're more comfortable with some cyclical projects, right? So you're comfortable like digging in deeper to the same thing and trying to keep making that one better, as opposed to continuing to have like new products come across your desk.
Yeah, I was going to speak to that depth too, that like, you know, we could be really in it with the supply chain or quality things that this is like long after the product could be handed off from a team like yours. But if you're in-house, it doesn't leave. They're still going to call you. They're still going to email, maybe late at night. We have a stop ship. Help.
Yeah.
But Jillian, you're obviously very intentional and, you know, I think could be working probably wherever you wanted. What are the reasons you keep staying at Minimal? You know, what is it about that structure, that team that feels so good, or the types of design approaches you take that you really connect with?
Is it because you still don't know what you want to be doing?
Yeah, it's a little bit, but no, I like the variety. I like that it's a small team. I know everyone that I work with personally, and now there's more of an opportunity to like lead the team more than I had in the past. So it's kind of cool to see every part of a company as you grow with it. So yeah, I enjoy being there, and yeah.
Well, it's working out for you,
basically it.
it seems. So
Yeah.
so you've grown and experienced a lot. Now you're the design director at Minimal.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, it's you know, from day to day, I'm still pretty hands-on working on projects, just like everyone else. It's, like I said, a small team, so that's kind of a necessity. But also thinking about how to run a project and like what components need to go into a project to get it to completion, and then motivating the team and designing the team as I see fit and as we all agree to get that project going.
So like similar to when we interviewed Treasure, who works at Anvil, she is so into being hands-on with the design process and with what they're working on. And she told us it's kind of a deal breaker to step away. It's painful for her. Do you think that it would be really tough to not be hands-on with the design projects in your team?
I think so. That's something I really enjoy, is being hands-on.
So you are managing these projects, but you're in the same design process as everybody. How do you make sure that you feel like a peer, you know, for 85% or 90 or whatever you would say it has to be, and then transition in and out of the role where you need to call the shot and make on the next move? You know, what's your sort of process for that?
I think that's something that kind of bleeds into itself. You know, there's always making sure there are enough check-ins and like planning steps with the team, saying like, okay, we have to have this done by Friday. We have to plan for this in the next 3 weeks. Here's the plan. Let's get it done. So that type of thing. But then there's also a lot of like, or I like to include a lot of like, so what do you think about the plan? And do you have any recommendations? Does that feel good to you? I think it's good to include everyone in the process of figuring out what the next goal is going to be. So that makes it feel more like we're all working together as a team, and less like I'm just telling people what to do, because I don't think anyone ever enjoys just like being told what to do.
And you probably knew a lot of them previously, right? Like you were working with the same people that you now manage the projects of.
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, there's been some, you know, people come and people go. But I do know some people that I've been working with for like 5-6 years. So
Do you think the process that you have of leading kind of developed because you're working with the same team? Is there anything that you could have like gone into prepared, or you have to pick it up like while you're on the job? Like, how would someone else do this, for example?
Yeah, I'm not sure about like how would someone else do this in a different place, but I think it's more on the organic side of things. Like the process kind of comes together organically. Of course, there is a little bit of like planning that goes on ahead of time. We have to make sure that we're not taking on too many projects or anything. But
Yeah, because you often hear that like to advance in career, get the higher position, it's best to change company. On the other hand, if you are just a designer and you wanna move up and you don't have like any extra education, like probably within company is easier. Like you mentioned, you were like organically growing and learning these new skills. Do you think you'd done it in different place? Or like it was really helpful to like plan the development in the same workplace?
yeah, I mean, I think either could work. It's hard for me to know what would happen or what would have happened if I left. But yeah, I think I've always gravitated towards like trying to lead a project. So I think that would translate over, or would have if I had left.
Is that something that you're like asking for, like, let me lead, or you just sort of prove I'm ready to lead and then they give it to you? Is it a combination of both?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a more organic process almost, where it kind of fell into place. Like it's a consultancy. I think things are a little bit fast paced, and you're trying to figure out, okay, who's going to lead this project? How are we going to balance this? And then, I ended up leading a project or two, and things went well. And then, I just keep doing it. So it's almost one of those things that it's like, organically happens and it works out, and everyone just figures out how to adapt to the role they're given for each project.
Yeah, so for those first specific ones, did you volunteer or did somebody say, hey, Jillian, I think you'd be really great at this leadership role?
I think one of the first ones, somebody was like, hey, we would like you to try leading this project, or being the design lead on this project. And that was they must have seen that I was ready for it, and it was the right timing. I was happy to take that opportunity and learn how to do that at that time.
Yeah, I mean, it means you had like good management, right? Because that's something I would like to be doing more, but surrounded by senior designers, when I say I want to lead something, it's like, 10 other people also want to. Now, when you are a director, like, do you look for talents who could move up, who could, help you out more? Who's the candidate for the next leader?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose yes, but also we're a pretty small team, and there are some like people that have been around a while, so it kind of is easier to know who is the next person or the next leader, because the team is not quite as big.
Seems like your team is driven a little bit by like just time length and seniority in that way. That's like when people get a shot, at least.
Yeah, I think, but the timeline usually corresponds with experience level. Like some of the people who we hired or have hired that are 2 years out of college, they're probably not quite ready for that yet. Whereas some of the people who I've been working for 5-6 years with, like they just know the ins and outs of how a project is run, and it just becomes evident. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It sounds nice at minimal. Like it's a really just natural like process to take each incremental step, which I'm sure a lot of people, would appreciate being part of. What are some management sort of styles that you experienced when you were a more junior designer, things you wanted to emulate, or things that you were like, ooh, I think that's going to be a style that doesn't work for my personality, or just you think doesn't work, period?
I think one thing that works that I was kind of touching on earlier is trying to include everyone who's working on the project in the process, and like really gauging what they think about the activities that we're doing, and whether or not they think that's feasible or is going to work. Because I think just making sure everyone has a voice is good, whether they're an intern or a senior designer or whatever. You never know where a great idea is going to come from. And if someone doesn't feel empowered to speak up, then everyone misses out on that idea. But I remember other people treating me that way when I was an intern as well, and like asking what I thought of things. And I thought that was kind of unique and empowering,
Yeah, it's nice. It's very leveling. Like you don't have to feel like there's a great hierarchy to the team.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that being in this leadership role, especially the longer you're there, has changed the way that you see yourself, your design skill, or your desire to do different types of work?
Yes and no. It's hard to think of things linearly because it all starts to blend together. And it's like, if I think back to what I was doing 5 years ago, it's definitely different than what I'm doing now. But it's been like so incremental that it's hard to see the change in like where I've changed. So that's a funny thing. I'm sure you all have had some, growth like that too, where you're like, oh, wow, I've really grown a lot, but I don't even recognize it.
But also curious how it impacts the creative life outside of work. You told us that you have an art show coming up, which is super cool. Do you feel like you're taking bigger risks or trusting yourself more in those arenas too?
Probably. I think, taking art a little bit more seriously or putting together a plan for that. It's work bleeding over to art in a way.
Those project management skills.
Yes, I guess.
You're managing yourself, keeping a tight ship. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
What else is there? Do you have any favorite story from Minimal to tell us?
Um,
Give us some like design failure, or let's call it an early misstep.
An early misstep. Man, I don't know.
Life is very smooth and good at Minimal. Everyone wants to work there now, right?
I'm just gonna go apply there later.
And then like anything funny, like I remember underneath the San Francisco IDEO, there was a dead seal for 2 months once. Yeah.
What? There was a what?
There was a dead seal underneath, like, the IDEO in SF is on the pier, and they had a dead seal under the studio.
Oh no.
Yeah.
It must have smelled so bad. That's rough.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any dead seals under Minimal?
Do you have seals in Lake Michigan?
No. Thankfully, no. I don't think the seals would survive there.
Oh man. Well, we'll check when we go on the tour today, right?
Yep.
Check for seals.
Well, we want to give you all a opportunity to ask Jillian some questions as well. We just wanted to really thank you all for, joining us as we did the first live version of this, appreciate you being here. It's really special, and appreciate the virtual audience for being here too. We've been really struck by the support that IDSA has given this group, and now also extended to the WID leadership for letting us get up on stage and try this out. Also, thank you, Jillian, so much for, deciding to trust us to have a really open-ended conversation with you in front of a bunch of people. You were awesome.
Thanks for inviting me.
Can I ask my question?
Oh, Margaret has a question. Signature question.
What is your favorite color?
Oh, I think it's somewhere between mustard yellow and chartreuse.
She was so ready. This
So
question is so hard.
sophisticated.
Hello. We'll take one question and then we'll transition into our next talk.
Quick question. Just wondering what you think the tenets are of good collaboration within the office and with clients.
I think it really just comes down to listening and making sure that you're taking notes of what people are saying and not just assuming that you know what they say.
All right, one more question.
Hello, thank you. I wanted to ask you, have you developed any habit over the years that had made you a better designer?
Yeah, I mean, funny enough, I would say that also comes to listening and empathizing with other people, like really understanding what the problem that you're trying to solve with the project is. Yeah, that goes, and having reason behind what you're designing instead of just, making a pretty picture.
Thank you so much, everyone. This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you.
We hope you liked it.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beyond Ray. I'm here with Ginger and Margaret, and very exciting actually, 1 year ago was our live episode in Chicago with Jillian Tackaberry. So she's back with us to reflect on that experience and just talk about what's happened this last year. Jillian is the design director at Minimal, which is a consultancy in Chicago. Jillian, thanks so much for being here. It's really nice to have you back.
Oh, thanks for having me again.
We just wanted to know if you would reflect a little bit on the experience of doing that live episode with us. What was it like for you up on stage? What has it been like in the year since, thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it was overall pretty good. It felt good at the end of it. I think at the beginning it was maybe a little intimidating, just getting in front of other, getting up on stage in front of other people and being interviewed is kind of especially a new experience. Like, it's not the same as giving a presentation or like talking directly to an audience. It's an unfamiliar dynamic, but overall, I think it felt pretty good at the end and during, but
Yeah, I think that's something we've always been a little conscious of, that, we're definitely self-conscious making this. It's something where you put yourself out there, but we know that for a guest, it's a lot to ask of them. So we try to make them comfortable. We try to make sure it's a good experience for everyone. In that way, it's a bit of a designed process too, and that's been something that, like, it's a skill that you grow, like, kind of conversationally, but beyond that, of like stage hospitality almost. But you can do that in Zoom too, like make people comfortable and want to talk to you.
yeah, that makes sense. I think you guys did a great job making me feel comfortable. At least it was just that initial of like getting on stage and thinking, oh, okay, what are we doing here? But
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I think we all felt that. And it's nice, like, and I think this happened on our other live too, of like when you're first up there, it's like lights, people, and it all feels really immediate. And then you can actually kind of hear it if you listen for it, that we kind of calm down, we get into the rhythm of it. I think that every kind of live presentation or show is a bit like that until you get into those really veteran ranks or people that are like born to be on stage. But yeah, I don't feel made for stage. It's tough.
Just practice enough. It'll
Yeah, just like anything, practice makes perfect.
And we also pretend we're journalists. We're industrial designers. And then one thing is stage, the other one is lead to conversation. And like when we record, we can always edit out. And it's not that like, oh, we don't know what we're doing. But sometimes you want to make it like more lightweight, more conversational. You go with an anecdote and you're not sure where it would take you. So if we go too much off rails, we can always correct it. But that wasn't really the case in Chicago. So I think it was the big one, how not to be boring, how to be like very entertaining, but also make sure we don't start talking about something completely different and get into the weeds we don't know how to get out of. Back to the topic.
Yeah, I think you feel the pressure of time because you don't want to go over time. We've got a stage slot. You want to be respectful of the other presenters and speakers. And then you want to cover, like, you have like all the goals for the conversation. And when we're in Zoom, we can spend a lot of time digging into something or having a side conversation or telling a story, a tangent. But the time actually goes kind of fast on stage. I don't know if you guys felt like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, we did.
I
definitely.
had my whole look at a watch trick. I shared that with Kate.
Yeah, I think it kind of fell out of my head when I was up there, to be honest. But yeah, I was curious, Jillian, when you were talking with us about leadership style, we had all these questions digging in with you. It feels like it maybe was a good opportunity also for you to reflect on how minimal is or is not like other companies, how your process is or is not like other leaders, coming out of that as you were back in your day-to-day work. Did you think a lot about, yeah, what your leadership style is like or why you're making the decisions you are?
It's hard to say. I think I did learn a lot from all of you, just filling me in on what it's like to work at other places, like work in corporate spaces or work in spaces that have leadership that's a little bit more hierarchical. Just things that I didn't have experience with. It's like you can learn a lot from talking to other people. I don't know that it would change anything or it changed anything that I do directly, but it was nice hearing other perspectives and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one of the things that we asked about your like development at Minimal was about like the self-directed choice or request to work on certain things or take on certain challenges. And then you'd managed to accomplish quite a few of those already when we had talked to you, which was great. And we were wondering, like, when it came to looking forward, you felt like you weren't sure, but that you would know it when you saw it. Has anything happened since then where you were like, oh yeah, this was a great mountain to climb since then that you hadn't identified yet?
I don't think so. It's kind of a boring answer, but it has only been a year. I think things in design or in this field tend to take time. I mean, just launching a product usually takes sometimes years. And I think usually when that happens, you might reflect on how did the process go? How did it, what would I change in the future? What couldn't I do anything about? I think that's always the hard part of reflecting on when those things happen is like there are always things that you can't control with projects and that you might think, oh, I could have done that better, but maybe you couldn't have, and it's okay to just let it go and say, okay, it turned out good enough, or it turned out how it turned out, and I'm going to choose to be happy with that and maybe take some learnings into the future, but know that you can't control everything.
Yeah, I want to know more about that. Like, what are some of the things that you're feeling like are often uninfluenceable by the designer?
Oh, sometimes you run out of time on a project, and it's not like you run out of time and it could have changed everything. Like, things are in a great place and they're getting made or whatever. But there are a lot of things to think of, like deadlines of like, we worked on a project recently. It just released. It's like a small shampoo bottle. It's like dry shampoo bottle. And for them, one of the things that was important was like getting this thing out before the end of the year. Because as a small company, they had investors that they had to impress. Like their funding was depending on getting this bottle out by the end of the year. And so
Which year? Because we're recording it in March.
Yeah. Well, so it's this year. Or no. Yeah, I guess it was this year is when they finally launched. I was working on this project at the time last year when we were interviewing.
So for like January.
And you hit the deadline.
We hit the deadline, which is good.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. This is amazing. A lot of people got dry shampoo for Christmas.
We, well, I didn't get released by then, but they had manufactured the bottle by then. So we hit the manufacturing deadline, and they had something to share with investors, but it just wasn't quite launched yet. So that ended up launching last month, I think. And you just sometimes look at something and think, if we could have had the manufacturers run this at a different temperature, it could have like fixed this one tiny little issue. And if we could have done this, it would have fixed this other issue. And sometimes that's why the process is iterative, and you might make the first version of a shampoo bottle in this case, and then come back and revisit it when they need to fix those issues and, manufacture more. So you can it's not like it's one and done, like, oh, I designed that thing and it's done now and it's out in the world. All right, goodbye. It's like you could keep revisiting these things. So
yeah, it's like endless, right? I think a lot of designers could always do another iteration, fix something else, do another version. It's never perfect for so many reasons, and time being a big one. But if no one ever stopped us, like, isn't it possible we would just keep churning? And then business would be like, hey, I have to make money on this at some point. I have to launch this.
Right, yeah. It'd be a 5-year project instead of a 1-year project.
Right.
Yeah. We would be procrastinating if we had like the infinite timeline. It's not like you would be cranking every day with the same passion as you do when you have the deadline.
That's true. I think it might be a benefit though to being a consultancy. Like that company might come back to you and ask for second iteration, but it really is out of your hands. Like if you were to continue working on that, it would be doing nothing for your company because it's not in-house, right? Like you can't go show those improvements to somebody and be like, hey, I think we should do this now.
Right, yeah.
So that's interesting. Yeah. I'm curious how you let go of steps of the process, like particularly when you're leading a team and delegating all of those tasks to people. Like, do you think it is easier or harder if you could compare to earlier in your career to like be on that deadline and realize that it is reliant on somebody else to do a number of iterations or do a stage of the process?
Well, it depends. I think like kind of like what I was talking about in the interview, because Minimal is so small, I'm still very hands-on with design. Not that there's still delegation, a lot that happens, but with that project, I was working pretty directly on it. I guess the question then becomes, how does that apply to other projects? I don't know that it changes anything really. I think it's kind of the same. It's like, it's still something that I worked directly on and I feel responsible for. So it makes you think about like, oh, how could we have done that differently? I think that's another thing is like, we tend to use that word a lot, the word we instead of I. Like, oh, I did that, or you did that, or it's like we did that, or okay, we could have done that better. Just like that subtle change of like thinking of yourself as a member of a team instead of like it's your fault or it's my fault or it's my win or it's your win. Not that you can't also have those things. I think you can. You can still give people credit when they do something good. But I think especially when someone makes a mistake, it's good to have the we mentality instead of the you. Just makes it so that nobody's ever completely taking the blame for something or feeling like they're alone in trying to do something that feels impossible sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And from like a logistics standpoint, how does Minimal really distribute work? Like, we talked with Treasure about how at Anvil they have like very particular stages where they always like rotate the process to the next person to make sure that everybody is doing work in sort of like a 50-50 way. It almost becomes impossible for them to feel like one person has ownership over any project. At Minimal, like what stages are shared? How does it get rotated around? If you could talk about that.
It kind of depends on the size of the project. Sometimes if it's a very small project, it might be a team that's like one designer, one engineer, and one strategist. Other times it's the whole design team working together, kind of like working on usually their own concepts or their own CAD, but there's a little bit of like passing things around and sharing things and like working on parts of things. It just depends on how complex the thing we're working on is. I think usually it starts with like people coming up with independent ideas, but then as it narrows down to like, okay, we've got one concept or we've got two concepts, then you might start sharing ideas and like saying, okay, now someone else is going to work on this concept and figure out what the buttons are going to look like, or is going to figure out if there are a bunch of different CMFs we haven't considered, or things like that tend to happen towards the end. But in the beginning, it's everyone coming up with different concepts. But there's sometimes sharing as well. Like, it's not like you're responsible for your own concepts and you can't be inspired by anyone else. It's like you want to share things.
Do you feel like you have a strong hand in the concept selection? Like there must be a point where you reduce the number of ideas and you sort of like pick the best to develop or continue on. Does that happen like with team consensus or is it more directed?
And I have one more part to this question. Where do you think you have this power from? So is it intuition? Is it books you read? Is it great mentors you had?
Oh, I like that question.
What fuels that ability that you can do it as a director?
Well, I guess I'll answer the first question first. I think there's a little bit of limiting things, or usually what happens is there are just a bunch of reviews where we all try and help everyone refine their concepts to be something that is like usable or like a good, we try and collectively make everyone's concepts strong. So everyone has concepts and along the way you say, oh, what if you moved the button to the other side, or what if you made it fit a little bit better, whatever it is. And then eventually it gets narrowed down a little bit, but I don't think we're ever saying like, or it's not very often that we're saying like, okay, only these 3 concepts get to be shown. We usually would show most things, or like we would have narrowed down hopefully before it gets to the point where we're showing the client something. So everyone is showing some work. But it's like everyone who's working on the project. It's not like your concept wasn't good enough, it's getting cut. Not that that's never happened, or if we have interns especially, they might do a ton of concepts and it's fine if we cut things. Or I mean, I've even cut my own concepts before, because it's not about like whose concept is who made it. It's about what's better, or what's like fills out the set of ideas better. And yeah, how to figure out what to do. I think the idea is to not cut anything. Well, you do have to cut things down eventually, but thankfully it's usually the client that is cutting down from like a set of 3-5 concepts versus us internally cutting down, like very specifically cutting down and choosing a concept. Sometimes we'll give recommendations, but It usually comes with like a pretty good consensus where we look at the things and print them out and say, okay, what makes the most sense? And what would we recommend in good faith? And we might choose like two to recommend. And then they might say, oh, we actually don't like either of those two. We like this other one. So maybe I don't know how to actually get rid of things or how to cut things, because I don't usually have to do the hardest part of that, which is like completely eliminating things.
Although I feel like even in your own process, like if you remove the fact that you're cutting other people's ideas, you do know how to do that to a degree, right? You know how to move through your own design decisions and why you're prioritizing one over the other to take it to concept phase.
Mm-hmm.
I think I had a similar question to this, which is sort of like, you said when we were interviewing you in Chicago that it's really important to you that people have a reason behind their design, that that's like the main driver. And I'm curious, yeah, how you feel like you've developed your ability to really hone in on the reason, how you encourage the designers that are younger than you or newer than you to get good at that. I think that maybe falls in the same vein.
Yeah, I think it's just like asking all the necessary questions as you go through the process. Like if the client gives you like a list of 10 things that you have to do, and then as designers, we figure out, oh, but we also have to consider these 3 things. Maybe I will try and think of an example. I guess I could talk about the shampoo bottle is it's like a powder dispensing shampoo bottle. And it was kind of challenging because it was like, we had to figure out a way to dispense powder that was like, it was like a clumpy powder that it was really hard to dispense it without it just getting like stuck in the bottle. So it kind of went from what is interesting, like they wanted it to be visually interesting because it's packaging and it's going to be on shelf and like online, to what can we make work. And it was like kind of this overlap of prototyping things with found objects and making the design look good, and like what can merge those 2 things to get the best of both worlds. And it ended up that there were only like 2 options that worked. And one had the negative of like it used more plastic than the other one. And for this client, they wanted it to be less plastic if possible, like more metal and more sustainable materials. So with that project, the answer was really easy. It's like it got narrowed down based on visually what did they like and what did we like. And then it was what works. And then it was like, okay, there's really only one solution now because this is what's checking all the boxes. And it's in that case, maybe it's a little easier than in some other instances where there's more gray area, because I don't think design's always that straightforward. Sometimes it's just like a styling thing, or it can be like a style thing where people have different opinions, and you might have like 5 people in the room that all like something different. And then it's like, all right, well, how do you convince someone of something? Then I think it helps to really pay attention to, like, if you're working with consumer electronics, like paying attention to the components and thinking what's the most efficient.
Design is subjective. We always come back to this. Like, design is subjective, and there are like multiple universes in which this product can look in different way and be super successful from the idea point of view.
There definitely are instances like that where it's like you're just kind of leaving it up to someone who decides something. But I think there's usually an angle. It's almost like you have to get good at convincing other people with logic. Actually, one of the former design directors of Minimal, he was really good at doing this. His name's Dave. I don't know if anyone knows Dave Seal, but he was really good at like finding the logic in everything. So it's like, well, we could do this, but if we do this, it's more symmetrical. Or like just finding things like, could you make a curve more like mathematical? Like, could you make the proportions more like 2:3 or 1:1? So it's like doing little tricks like that to make it like more logical, or just like thinking of the components or the way you use something, and just like making an argument for the design based on the attributes that you're trying to achieve, like the physical attributes or the ergonomic attributes or whatever it is like, it's a very easy way to make an argument to a client that doesn't know about design. But I think it helps with designers too, because sometimes anyone can think of something that somebody else hasn't thought of. And it helps to share those ideas when it's like, I really spent some time thinking about the ergonomics of this thing. this is what I found. And based on what I found, this is how it should be, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah. Are you able to talk at all about the Theragun? I don't know how personally involved you were with that, but that's like such a beautiful product and something that has to be, I feel like, probably really heavily researched on how it's going to be nice to hold, or like all these different angles you're going to be trying to position it on your body. It feels like a cool ergonomic exploration.
Yeah. Kind of like in relation to what we were just talking about, or just
Yeah.
like how we made decisions and narrowed down on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one was interesting because it's such an ergonomic product, but it also has like all these components inside it. So you have to work around like what makes the Theragun work, which is like this giant motor. And then you also had to make sure that it was easy to hold. And part of that was based on their previous iteration. So they had a previous iteration that had fewer, it was a little bit more like, I don't know what to call it. It wasn't like a triangle, but it had a little bit more of like a shape that was narrower in the middle instead of like a triangle, like the current ones do. And the physical therapist, whose idea at first was like, oh, I want to be able to hold it like this, and I want to be able to hold it like this, and I want to be able to hold it like this. And then they had found that based on the device that they had, the people were like holding it behind their back. So it was also useful to like hold it kind of by that edge. So it was a combination of things that they found, and then us trying to figure out how you could fit their newer components inside the form, and also add like a couple of features. Like at that time, they wanted to create a custom battery that was swappable. So they had this battery that was just off the shelf at the time, and they wanted to kind of redo that and make it more integrated into the form. So there were only so many places where you could put something as big as a battery that like powers a device that like heavy duty.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how it turned into the triangular form, is like the back was a good place to end up with that, or to put that battery. And then the front had to be the motor. So it's like driven by the internal components, but then also not being able to compromise on all the positions that the physical therapist who helped to invent it wanted it to be usable in, and then the kind of insights from users that were currently using one of their previous devices. I think that also becomes a more straightforward design story, because there aren't as many options based on the constraints. So based on like the user insights and based on the what they wanted to do internally, it's kind of merged into one thing. And you could design it in a couple different ways. I think there were a couple of other options that we had at the time, but the one they landed on was just it was kind of the one they chose. We also, I think, recommended it, but I'm not sure, it was a while ago.
Do you personally, or Minimal as a whole, have some go-to strategies when you are facing a lack of constraints, or you just feel like you don't have enough things to go off of to make decisions?
Let me think about that. I don't know. That's kind of a tough question. It seems like there's always a constraint, or always at least a set of constraints that decide some of what we're doing. So it's not very often that we run into that issue.
What I'm hearing is some strong problem framing that you guys have. So you don't really run it. You always have a North Star.
Well, it's not like there's always a direct North Star. It's just that there are always so many problems that you're trying to solve that, like, if you want to hit all those boxes, it ends up being kind of one thing. Or sure, if you worked on it more, if you had more people working on it, it could become many things. But we only have so much time. You build a certain amount of time into the first phase of creating concepts, and anyone who's working on a deadline is probably working the same way, where like you only have a set amount of time to really work on concepts. Then you have to get into detailing things a little bit more and like move down the line. So it's kind of based on what did we create in that first section of like brainstorming and thinking of concepts, and then how does that merge with all the problems that we're trying to solve. And I'm sure there are other options that we didn't even consider, but that also is something that helps to narrow it down. Time, once again, coming back to that.
I think that Ginger is hitting on something, though, which feels like maybe you guys have magical clients, but I feel like probably people show up in your office and they have needs, but they're not like as articulated as the design team potentially needs them to be to move forward, right? So who's in that initial process of like asking the right questions to the clients to pull out their highest needs? I feel like you guys have somebody or many people that are very good at problem ID and like synthesis. So how do you do that?
Yeah, so when the client doesn't have as much of an idea, or they're saying one thing but they're meaning another thing, I think that happens a lot. It's like a lot of clients don't know designs so well, like they don't really understand the process quite until they've done it. And in that case, I think it's usually that we just have to spend some time thinking about what are the issues that are coming up, like what are the red flags that are coming up in our minds that they maybe didn't talk about, or they're not even considering that they're issues yet. So we kind of have to start off by saying, okay, here are a couple of things that we think might be problems. How do you want to solve that? And kind of go from there. And usually it's just a matter of getting them on board, or helping them understand those problems.
That's really smart. So it's still a question. You're like, we think we see these as your constraints. Like, is that ringing true? And you
Right,
make sure
yeah.
that there's like still really consistent buy-in, basically, of the direction.
Mhm.
That's cool. You also talked a little bit when we interviewed you before, I think, about this value, which is coming out as you're talking about your work again, of just like really deeply listening. You mentioned it as being like kind of the collaboration tool that you lean on most, the leadership tool that you lean on most. I would like to understand where that value came from. Have you like been a really good listener your whole life and you've sort of have been able to see the benefits of it paying off? Do you feel like it's something you had to learn later in your career because it was something you didn't do as much when you were younger? Like how did it start emerging as your cornerstone?
I think mostly because I'm a quiet person and I don't talk as much usually. Or at least I was. I still am, but definitely was in my earliest years of design. So I would spend my time listening in meetings and not having to talk as much. I think these days I'm doing a lot more talking just because I have to do more presenting. And I think when you're not talking as much, sometimes you're just taking things in. So that's what I was doing. And now I have to sometimes lean on other people that were listening a little bit more closely. I mean, I'm also trying to listen, but it's hard when you're doing more talking. So I'm glad there are a lot of people, or, we have a lot of great listeners on the team.
As a quiet person, was that a challenge to overcome to do more presenting? Did you feel like that was something you had to push yourself to do?
Initially, yes. I think now it's pretty easy in some ways because all it really needs to be is explaining what you did and why you did it. And if you're thinking about it, or you're, discussing it with the team, whether that's, me working on things or me working on things with other people, and hearing what their issues were when they were designing something and understanding those issues, it's kind of just walking through uh, the whatever we're presenting and explaining the design process, which I think is easier than some other types of public speaking. Say like getting up and giving a speech is different than just explaining what you did and why you did it.
Okay.
But I can't imagine giving a lecture to students. I don't know how to do that. I mean, I'm sure it's the same thing. Practice makes perfect. But how about, do any of you guys ever present things, or?
Yeah, I think like in work presentations, I think I have a similar strategy as what it sounds like you do, which is like I just very much lean on the fact that I feel like we're responding to the constraints. So it is personal and it is coming from me, but it feels so like based in logic that doesn't really feel scary.
Mhm.
I am gonna start teaching this spring, and I like you, I feel like more nervous about that in a way because I think that the students will look to you for a lot more direction. But my gut feeling, and we'll see how it plays out, is that like it still is a lot about like just opening the stage for them to feel like they can look internally or like at the problem for more of the answers, and that it's not like it doesn't need to be this hierarchical, like it's coming from the person that's up at the front of the classroom
Mhm.
story. So yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it feels like a way of working as opposed to your presenting. And maybe that's very different if you are in, I don't know, a VC setting, you're doing a pitch. Like
Right.
it's more about like, hey, we're doing this design, this is what I've come up with, and just communicating yourself and inviting other people to talk about it. Which to that effect, like I don't really do that in a formal presentation setting. Very rarely. I think the instances that I have, it's been more about like when there was less comment, I guess, from an audience, so to speak. It was like, hey, here's our research, and I was there in person. So it's a little harder for other people to have anything to say about it, and just instead they're there to absorb.
Mhm.
But other times it's like, no, we're just engineers and design sitting here talking back and forth about what we're working on. And there's that mechanism that doesn't really feel like you are a presenter or a speaker. You're just a worker with knowledge.
Yeah.
This might be a fun question. Is it easier for you to present a product, or to present your fine art work when you have a show?
I think they're both the same actually, because when I'm presenting my artwork, I'm doing the exact same thing of like just talking about how I made it and what it's made with and all that. I think maybe where the two differ is that, but this can happen also in design sometimes. Like if you have a client that really wants more of a story behind the design, you have to start like thinking about what that story is or what it could be. I think some people, when they view art, they think they don't want just how it's made. They want like what the story is behind it, or like what it was inspired by, or some of these like more fuzzy things that it's harder to explain. And that's maybe where I struggle a little bit, but mostly because I think as designers, you don't think about that very often, or at least I don't. I know some people do, or some
You
people
make
lean
this
into
stuff
that.
up.
Yeah.
You make it up when you make a portfolio.
Shh, Margaret,
Yeah.
don't give away our secret.
But some people do lean into that more, and I don't think it's ever been how I think, but I've met designers that are always like thinking about something as like, oh, I was inspired by, you know, the nature in the Grand Canyon or something. And so everything's like red. And I think there are people that do that, but it's usually a little bit more artsy and less like product focused design.
See, as somebody who is really motivated by constraints, I'm really intrigued by this side of you that does fine art. Yeah, it feels like the reason I've never approached that personally is like there's not a why behind the next decision I feel like I would be making if I was doing an abstract painting or something like that. So what is it like for you when you're creating your artwork? Are you like in just a flow state of like putting the next material on, or is there a vision you have beforehand that you're really excited to see through? You know, how are you making decisions?
I think I tend to approach art like I approach design, where I'm always like making a plan first and like creating a color palette and then making the art, versus like, what am I going to make this time, and just kind of going for it. I don't really do that. There's always kind of a plan that I, go for and produce.
Clearly it worked well.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The mixed material is neat too. Yeah. Do you like really just want to see how the different materials interact with each other when they're on a canvas?
I don't know. I think I'm just trying to like balance the textures, or like I'm just trying to make a palette that is really interesting and has a bunch of different textures. And it's kind of more like creating the swatch and then, or using what I have and seeing what I can do with what I have. Yeah.
So there's some like natural constraints of like what you have on hand, probably, I guess, size of canvas.
Yeah, usually I'll think about like, what do I want to, because I do have to get like stretcher bars, or recently I'm making these pieces that are like differently shaped, like they're kind of arches and like combined together, almost like sculpture and painting together.
Cool.
And those I had to like get cut to the right size. So I had to like make the line work and have some cut it. I would have cut it, but I did that last time and I don't have the space to cut wood in my backyard. So I just had someone. Yeah.
You got it at work. That's the perks of being industrial designer.
I also tried doing that. I tried using the laser cutter to cut a piece of art, and it's just like trying to burn through wood with a laser cutter, unless it's really thin, is a lot of smoke and a lot of like char.
That's true. Yeah.
And it was easy enough to send off some line work to a local CNC shop and have them cut the canvases, and it wasn't that much different than just buying stretcher bars of the same size, as far as like, it's not that expensive. So
nice.
I think I have a question to like put an like anchor between the professional work and the hobby work. Do you think you're like getting more successful on your like hobby, creative fine art work side when you have a good flow at design work, or when you're getting frustrated? Because like project by project, sometimes you're like king of the world, sometimes it really sucks. When are you getting better on your side creative work?
I think it tends to be more like flows of when like flows of creativity, like, okay, lots of creativity everywhere, and then less creativity everywhere. That's probably how it is. So it's like moments of being very productive and others where I'm not quite as productive or
It
not
makes
quite
sense.
as
It's good to hear
creative
that.
feeling. Yeah.
It all feeds into each other. Yeah. Do you use your art as like an outlet when you are feeling stuck ever, or does that not work for you?
I don't think it's really that
Mhm.
effective. I mean, sometimes I think I'll like sketch on my iPad on like art ideas
Mhm.
because it's not like tied to making things yet, which when it gets into making things, it can be really tedious. And I think that's true with like both product design and art, or at least the art that I do is like it's pretty tedious, like sewing things and making things straight lines. I don't know why I decided to do this type of art. It's a lot of the same stuff, I guess. But just sketching is nice sometimes. Like maybe I do that.
We don't have to glorify it. I think
Yeah.
it's very true to a lot of people. Like if things are flowing, they're flowing. And
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
not, you just eat popcorn and watch Love is Blind.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like a second degree artist. You like want the, like the reflection on it after. But it sounds like you picked a couple processes that are both like painstaking in some ways.
Yeah. Like it's really satisfying. A lot like design. It's really satisfying to create something and then like, okay, it's done and it looks good and it's how I wanted it to be.
Mhm.
But then the getting there, like the process between the idea and then there's like the process of making it, and then there's the final thing. The final thing feels really good, and the idea thing is really nice. But then all the stuff in the middle, it has its benefits, but it's kind of always a struggle, no matter what it is.
Birthing your idea, you got
Yeah.
to bring it into the world. Yeah, a friend of mine who makes films and I have talked about that a lot. It's like it's just because it's the process of it becoming real, like means that you have to come to terms with all of the parts that make something not just perfect and imaginary, right? Like
Mhm.
it's tangible. It means it's like a trade-off. But then it's much more rewarding to see it in real life. It's just that of course the process of getting there is like you realize you have to sacrifice some little details that maybe you didn't even think about when it was just this beautiful imagination thing.
Mhm.
Well, Jillian, it's been really, really nice of you to give us more of your time and interesting to be able to dive a little deeper with all that time than we could have just on stage with you in Chicago. We have a question we really love to ask everybody that comes on the show. And since we didn't ask it live, I want to now, which is just what is it that you bring to the table that's really uniquely yours and, means that you should have a seat there?
I don't know. That's a tough question.
Take your time. Yeah. The point of it, just so you know, is like we really want you to reflect on your strengths and celebrate yourself a little bit. I think that like that's something that as women we don't have a tendency to do as much. And so that's why it's important to us.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I'm pretty good at balancing the creative side of things with the planning side of things. It kind of, as I was talking about before, just like the execution and all the steps that it takes to do that is like something that also fuels me, maybe in a unique way.
I think that's why you can take your art pieces into reality, and that's why you can manage whole products. Like you don't shy away from that, right?
Yeah, I like getting into that, and I like planning, but also being creative and thinking of all those steps, even though it may be challenging, as we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's hard work.
Jillian, if people want to be able to get in touch with you, see the work that you're doing, follow your art, what's the best way for them to find you?
I think, well, it would be two things. One is LinkedIn, if you're looking to talk about product design or industrial design stuff. And then the other is where I put my art, and that's Eomykota on Instagram.
Nice. And you can find us also at wid_Seattle on Instagram and check out our website, beyondraypodcast.com, to listen to more episodes. Jillian, thank you so much for coming today. It was really, really nice to see you again and catch up on how you've been doing.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And also great talking again.